In the sprawling suburbs of Los Angeles, where palm trees sway against the endless California sky, lies the neighborhood of Valley Vista. With its population barely touching 8,000, it's the kind of place where neighbors wave to each other, where backyard barbecues are weekend traditions, and where the biggest excitement usually comes from the local farmers market. But on a humid afternoon in September 2024, this quiet neighborhood would become the epicenter of a tragedy that would shake its foundations and make headlines across the nation. At the center of this storm was Sergeant David Martinez, a decorated soldier who had dedicated his life to serving his country. Little did anyone know that on this fateful afternoon, he would become both victim and perpetrator in a case that hit far too close to home. David Martinez wasn't born into military life. He fought his way into it. Growing up in the tougher parts of San Diego, he had seen firsthand the impact of gang violence on communities. His older brother, a promising student, had been caught in gang crossfire when David was just 14. That tragedy became the catalyst for his lifelong mission to serve and protect. After graduating high school with decent grades, David enlisted in the Army, driven by a fierce determination to make a difference. His commanding officers noted his exceptional discipline and unwavering dedication. He excelled in training and quickly rose through the ranks, earning his sergeant stripes by age 28. But military life wasn't where David saw his entire future. He dreamed of a stable home, a family to come back to after deployments, someone who would understand the weight he carried. When he met Lisa Chen at a veterans charity event in Los Angeles, David saw his chance at happiness. Lisa, a 29-year-old nurse at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, was everything David had ever wanted in a partner. Compassionate, independent, and deeply supportive of his military career. Their romance blossomed quickly, culminating in a beautiful wedding ceremony at a beachside venue in Santa Monica. Friends and family celebrated the union of two people who seemed destined for each other. To the outside world, the Martinez family was the epitome of the American dream. David was the dedicated soldier who served multiple tours overseas, always returning home to his loving wife. Lisa was the caring nurse who held down the fort during his deployments, sending care packages and keeping their home together. They had purchased a modest 3-bedroom house in Valley Vista, complete with a white picket fence and a golden retriever named Scout. But as we often learn in life, appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the brightest smiles hide the deepest pain. As David approached his mid-30s, subtle changes began to occur in the Martinez household. To the casual observer, everything seemed normal, but those closest to the couple started to notice small, unsettling shifts. David, always known for his disciplined routine and positive attitude, became more withdrawn. He started experiencing severe insomnia, often pacing the house at 3 a.m. When neighbors asked how he was doing, he would force a smile and insist everything was fine, but his eyes told a different story. Lisa, on the other hand, became increasingly distant. She started taking extra shifts at the hospital, often staying late for reasons that seemed vague. She changed her phone password and began keeping her device face down on tables. When David would try to plan date nights or weekend getaways, Lisa always had an excuse. Too tired, too busy, too stressed. Friends noticed how she would become evasive when asked about her marriage, changing the subject or checking her watch as if late for something. Michael Torres, David's best friend from his Army days and a fellow veteran living nearby, was among the first to sense something was amiss. He noticed how David would tense up when talking about Lisa, how he would avoid mentioning her altogether during their weekly workout sessions. But every time Michael tried to broach the subject, David would shut down, insisting that deployment stress was just catching up with him. As months passed, the cracks in the Martinez family's perfect image began to widen. Neighbors reported seeing an unfamiliar BMW parked in the driveway during the day when David was at the base. Lisa was spotted having intense conversations on her phone in the backyard, conversations that would end abruptly if David appeared. David himself became increasingly paranoid, questioning Lisa about her whereabouts and checking her work schedule obsessively. The neighborhood of Valley Vista, always quick to notice changes but slow to interfere, began to whisper. What was happening to the soldier and his wife? Was it just the normal strain of military life on a marriage? Or was there something more troubling lurking beneath the surface? Little did they know. The true nature of the Martinez family's troubles was about to explode in a way that would leave everyone shaken. September 12th, 2024 started like any other Wednesday in Valley Vista. The morning sun rose over the San Gabriel Mountains, promising another warm California day. David Martinez left for his shift at Fort MacArthur before 6 a.m., as was his habit. Lisa Martinez prepared for what she told David would be a double shift at the hospital. Scout, their golden retriever, lounged in the backyard, unaware that this day would shatter the life he knew. But fate had other plans for the Martinez family that day. Around 11 a.m., David received a text from his commanding officer. A training exercise scheduled for that afternoon had been postponed due to equipment issues. David was given the rest of the day off. A rare gift he decided to use to surprise Lisa with lunch. He stopped by her favorite Italian restaurant, picking up chicken parmesan and tiramisu, her weakness. As he drove home in his silver Dodge Charger, David felt lighter than he had in months. Maybe this surprise would help bridge the growing distance between them. As he pulled into the driveway at 12:15 p.m., David noticed the house appeared quiet. Lisa's Honda Accord was in the garage, which confused him. She should have been at the hospital. Then he saw it. A black BMW 7 Series parked on the street just a few houses down. Something about it made his stomach drop, though he couldn't explain why. An uneasy feeling settled over him as he approached the front door with the takeout bag in hand. The house was eerily quiet. David called out for Lisa, but no one answered. Scout greeted him at the door, tail wagging, but even the dog seemed subdued. David set the food down on the kitchen counter, his military instincts on high alert. Something wasn't right. As he made his way upstairs, he heard sounds, muffled voices, movement. His heart began to race as he approached their bedroom, the master bedroom where they had shared countless intimate moments, where they had made promises to each other. David's hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. Part of him wanted to turn around, to leave, to unknow whatever he was about to discover. But he pushed the door open anyway. What he saw next would be forever seared into his memory. There, on their king-sized bed with the blue comforter Lisa had picked out at Pottery Barn, was his wife. But she wasn't alone. Entangled with her was a man David had never seen before. Tall, well-dressed, probably in his early 40s. The man's expensive suit jacket was draped over the chair David sat in every morning to put on his boots. For a moment, time stood still. David felt as if he were watching the scene unfold from outside his body, as if this were happening to someone else. Then reality came crashing down with the force of a freight train. "What the hell is this?" David's voice, usually so controlled, came out as a strangled gasp. Lisa and the man sprang apart, eyes wide with shock and fear. Lisa grabbed the sheet, pulling it up to cover herself, her face flushing crimson. The man scrambled to grab his clothes, muttering curses under his breath. "David, I didn't think you'd be home," Lisa stammered, stating the obvious in her panic. "That's what you have to say?" David's voice was rising now, years of suspicion and doubt crystallizing into this one devastating moment. "That you didn't think I'd be home?" The stranger, now pulling on his pants, tried to slip past David toward the door. "Look, man, I didn't know she was married to a—" "Get out!" David's voice was cold, deadly calm. The soldier in him was taking over, compartmentalizing the pain to deal with the immediate threat. "Get out of my house, now!" The man didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket and shoes, practically running down the stairs. David heard the front door slam, then the sound of the BMW's engine roaring to life and speeding away. Now it was just David and Lisa, the woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted while he was deployed overseas, risking his life. The woman who had vowed to stand by him through everything. She sat on their bed, tears streaming down her face, but David felt nothing but rage. "How long?" he demanded, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. "David, please, let me explain." "How long?" he roared, and Lisa flinched. 6 months, she whispered, and those 2 words shattered whatever remained of David's heart. 6 months, half a year. While he had been working extra hours at the base, dealing with PTSD from his last deployment, trying to be a good husband, she had been betraying him in their own home. "Who is he?" David asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "His name is Richard Blackwell. He's a surgeon at the hospital." "David, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It just what? Just happened? You accidentally fell into bed with him? Multiple times? For 6 months?" David's voice dripped with sarcasm and pain. Lisa was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks. "You're never here, David. You're always at the base, or you're deployed, or when you are here, you're distant and cold. I was lonely. I needed someone who was actually present." Those words hit David like bullets. So this was his fault? His service, his sacrifice, his dedication to protecting his country. That was the reason she cheated? In that moment, Sergeant David Martinez faced the most difficult moment of his life. As a soldier, he had been trained to maintain control, to follow rules of engagement, to distinguish between threats and civilians. But as a husband, as a man betrayed in the worst possible way, all he could feel was rage. What happened next would change the course of many lives and shake the quiet neighborhood of Valley Vista to its very core. The next few moments passed in a blur of rage and adrenaline. Later, David would struggle to recall the exact sequence of events, but the consequences of those moments would haunt him for the rest of his life. As Lisa continued to plead and make excuses, something inside David snapped. His hands moved on instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments. He reached for his service weapon, a Beretta M9, which he kept in the locked drawer of his nightstand. The key was on his keychain, which was in his pocket. Time seemed to slow down as his training kicked in, but this wasn't a combat zone. This was his bedroom, his wife, his life falling apart. "David." "No!" Lisa's eyes widened in terror as she realized what he was doing. She scrambled off the bed, backing toward the window. "Think about what you're doing, please." But David wasn't thinking. The PTSD, the betrayal, the months of suspicion and gaslighting, it all came pouring out in a wave of uncontrollable fury. He unlocked the drawer with shaking hands. "You destroyed everything," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I fought for this country. I fought for us. And you—" His voice broke entirely. "David, please, we can work through this. We can go to counseling. Please, just put the gun down." Lisa was crying hysterically now, her hands raised in surrender. But the weapon was already in David's hand. He raised it, his military training making the motion smooth. Automatic. Lisa screamed. Bang! The first shot went wide, shattering the mirror above their dresser. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and Scout began barking frantically downstairs. Bang! Bang! The second shot hit the wall next to Lisa. The third grazed her shoulder and she cried out in pain, dropping to the floor. "David, stop! Please!" she sobbed, blood seeping through her fingers as she clutched her shoulder. But David didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The rage that had been building inside him for months, maybe years, finally found its release. Bang, bang, bang. 3 more shots rang out. One hit Lisa in the chest, another in the abdomen. The final one struck her in the neck. She collapsed completely, her body going limp, blood pooling on the hardwood floor they had installed together just last spring. As the echo of the final shot faded, reality came crashing back. David looked down at Lisa's motionless body, the weapon still smoking in his hand. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of her perfume. Chanel No. 5, the one he had bought her for their anniversary. For a moment, David stood there frozen, his arms still outstretched. Then, as if waking from a nightmare, he lowered the weapon. His combat medic training kicked in automatically, and he dropped to his knees, checking for Lisa's pulse. It was faint, barely there, but she was still alive. Oh God, what did I do?" David's voice was barely a whisper as the full weight of his actions hit him. "Lisa, stay with me, please stay with me." With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "This is Sergeant David Martinez at 742 Oakwood Drive in Valley Vista. I need an ambulance immediately. Shots fired." "My wife?" "I shot my wife. Please hurry." The 911 operator tried to keep him on the line to get more information, but David was barely coherent. He applied pressure to Lisa's wounds using sheets from their bed, trying desperately to save the woman he had just tried to kill. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered apologies, pleaded with her to hold on, begged for forgiveness. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder with each passing second. Neighbors who had heard the shots were coming out of their houses, phones in hand. Within minutes, Valley Vista would be swarming with police, ambulances, and news crews. As the sirens grew closer, David Martinez sat on his bedroom floor, covered in his wife's blood, the smoking gun now discarded beside him. The decorated soldier, the man who had served his country with honor, now sat in his own home, a would-be murderer waiting to be arrested. The next few hours passed in a chaotic blur of flashing lights, urgent voices, and shocked faces. Michael Torres, David's best friend, was among the first civilians to arrive, having heard the commotion from 2 streets over. The look of horror on his face when he saw David being led out in handcuffs, his hands still stained with blood, was something David would never forget. "David, what the hell happened?" Michael shouted, trying to push past the police barricade. David couldn't answer. He couldn't look at his friend, couldn't face the disappointment and confusion he saw there. He simply hung his head as officers read him his rights and loaded him into the back of a patrol car. Lisa was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, ironically, the same hospital where she worked. The trauma team worked frantically to save her life. She had lost massive amounts of blood and her injuries were critical. The bullet to her chest had narrowly missed her heart, but her lung was collapsed. The abdominal wound had damaged her liver. The neck wound, while not immediately fatal, posed a serious risk of infection and complications. As word spread through Valley Vista, a crowd began to gather outside the Martinez residence. Neighbors stood in shocked silence, watching as crime scene technicians entered the house, and police tape was strung across the once welcoming front porch where David and Lisa had shared morning coffee just days before. The news spread like wildfire through Los Angeles County. By nightfall, every news station was covering the story. Decorated Army Sergeant shoots wife after catching her with lover. The media had its hooks in the story, and they weren't letting go. The case quickly gained national attention. News vans from CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC descended on Valley Vista, turning the quiet neighborhood into a media circus. Reporters camped out in front of the hospital, hoping for updates on Lisa's condition, and outside the Los Angeles County Jail where David was being held. Meanwhile, David sat in a cell, the reality of what he had done slowly sinking in. He had tried to kill his wife, the woman he had once loved more than anything. Yes, she had betrayed him, devastated him. But did that justify what he had done? The faces of his commanding officers, his fellow soldiers, his family, all flashed through his mind. He had let everyone down. As days turned into weeks, more details about the case came to light. Investigators discovered text messages between Lisa and Richard Blackwell, dating back 8 months, not 6, as Lisa had claimed. The messages were explicit, detailed, and painted a picture of a full-blown affair, not just a few moments of weakness. They also discovered that Lisa had been planning to ask David for a divorce, but had been waiting for his deployment benefits to fully vest. This revelation shifted some public opinion in David's favor, with many now seeing him as a victim of not just infidelity, but financial manipulation as well. Lisa survived her injuries but remained in critical condition for weeks. When she was finally stable enough to speak with police, she gave a detailed account of what happened that day, corroborating David's version of events, with one critical difference. She claimed David had threatened to kill her multiple times in the weeks leading up to the shooting, a claim David vehemently denied. The district attorney's office found itself handling an explosive case. On one hand, David had clearly attempted to murder his wife. On the other, the circumstances, catching her in the act of adultery, sparked debate about crime of passion defenses and whether his PTSD from military service had played a role. After careful deliberation, they decided to charge David with attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. If convicted, he faced 25 years to life in prison. His military career, his reputation, his freedom, everything hung in the balance. As the case moved toward trial, Valley Vista remained divided. Some residents, particularly veterans and military families, sympathized with David, understanding the unique pressures of military marriages and the betrayal he had experienced. Yard signs reading "Support our troops" began appearing, though it was unclear if they were specifically for David or a general statement. Others, particularly women's advocacy groups, rallied around Lisa, arguing that no matter what she had done, it didn't justify attempted murder. "Infidelity is not a death sentence" became a counter-slogan, with protesters gathering outside the courthouse. Through it all, David remained in custody, unable to make the $2 million bail. His family hired a prominent defense attorney, Patricia Vance, known for her work with veterans suffering from PTSD. She immediately began building a defense centered around David's mental state, his service-related trauma, and the extreme emotional distress caused by discovering his wife's infidelity. As summer turned to fall, Valley Vista tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the shadow of what had happened in the Martinez home hung over the neighborhood like a dark cloud. The "for sale" signs began popping up as some families decided they no longer felt safe in a place where such violence could occur. The Martinez house sat empty, a crime scene waiting to be released. Inside, the bloodstains had dried on the bedroom floor, a grim reminder of how quickly love can turn to violence, how betrayal can push even the most disciplined person beyond their breaking point. The trial of David Martinez was set for January 2025, promising to be one of the most high-profile and controversial trials in Los Angeles County history. The question on everyone's mind: was David Martinez a victim who had been pushed too far, or was he simply a man who couldn't control his rage? The trial of David Martinez began on a cold January morning, exactly 4 months after the shooting. The Los Angeles County Superior Court had never seen anything quite like it. National news networks set up camp outside their satellite trucks lining the streets. Spectators began queuing up at dawn, hoping to secure one of the limited seats in the courtroom. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with tension. David sat at the defense table, looking gaunt and pale in an ill-fitting gray suit. His attorney, Patricia Vance, sat beside him, exuding a confident determination despite the uphill battle ahead. Lisa Martinez, now recovered enough to attend, sat in the front row of the gallery. She wore a high-necked blouse that couldn't quite hide the scar on her neck. Her presence was both necessary and painful, the living reminder of David's actions. As the trial began, the prosecution painted David as a violent, controlling husband who had snapped when he lost control of his wife. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney James Chen, began, "this case is about a man who believed he had the right to take another person's life because she didn't live up to his expectations. Sergeant Martinez had every right to be angry, to be hurt, to file for divorce. He did not have the right to become judge, jury, and executioner." The defense, however, portrayed David as a decorated veteran suffering from undiagnosed PTSD who had been pushed beyond his breaking point by a calculated betrayal. "Imagine dedicating your life to serving your country," Patricia Vance said in her opening statement. "Surviving combat, watching friends die, coming home to what you think is safety, only to discover that the person you trusted most in the world has been systematically destroying your life." David Martinez didn't plan this. He didn't wake up that morning intending to hurt anyone. He walked into his home expecting normalcy and instead walked into a nightmare. Over the next 3 weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Fellow soldiers testified to David's exemplary service record and the toll multiple deployments had taken on his mental health. A psychiatrist explained how PTSD could impair judgment and increase impulsive, violent reactions to extreme stress. Forensic experts reconstructed the scene, confirming that all 6 shots had been fired in rapid succession, consistent with an uncontrolled emotional response rather than premeditated murder. They noted that David had immediately called 911 and attempted to render aid, suggesting instant remorse. But the prosecution had powerful testimony as well. Lisa took the stand, her voice shaking as she recounted the terror of that afternoon. "I made a terrible mistake," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I betrayed my husband, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But I didn't deserve to die for it. Nobody deserves that." Richard Blackwell, the man Lisa had been having the affair with, also testified, admitting to the affair and expressing remorse for his role in the tragedy. His testimony revealed that Lisa had told him her marriage was essentially over, that she and David were merely roommates, claims David's attorney vigorously challenged. As the trial progressed, it became clear that public opinion was sharply divided. Outside the courthouse, supporters of both David and Lisa held competing rallies. Veterans groups organized Justice for Martinez events, while domestic violence prevention organizations countered with Survivors Stand with Lisa campaigns. The hashtag #MoneyYourTeamDavid versus #TeamLisa trended nationally on social media, with people taking passionate sides based often on their own life experiences. Those who had been betrayed sympathized with David, while those who had experienced domestic violence sided with Lisa. Finally, after 3 grueling weeks of testimony, it was time for closing arguments. James Chen made a final, emotional plea for the jury to see past the sympathetic narrative and focus on the facts. "Yes, David Martinez suffered," he said. "Yes, he was betrayed. Yes, he has PTSD. But millions of veterans have PTSD and don't shoot their spouses. Millions of people experience infidelity and don't resort to violence. We cannot, as a society, accept attempted murder as an understandable response to adultery. To do so would be to excuse violence against women everywhere." Patricia Vance, in her closing argument, appealed directly to the jury's sense of compassion and understanding of human frailty. "David Martinez is not a monster," she declared passionately. "He's a man who broke. After years of service, after months of suspicion and gaslighting, after walking into his own bedroom and seeing his worst nightmare confirmed. He broke. And yes, what he did was wrong. He knows that. He will carry that guilt forever. But this was not murder. This was a man experiencing a complete psychological breakdown in the worst moment of his life." As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, the tension in Valley Vista and across the nation was palpable. Everyone knew that the verdict would have far-reaching implications, not just for David and Lisa, but for how society views crimes of passion, PTSD in veterans, and the limits of human endurance in the face of betrayal. Hours turned into days as the jury deliberated. Speculation ran rampant about what was taking so long. Was the jury divided? Were they struggling with the complexity of the charges, or were they simply being thorough, understanding the weight of their decision? Finally, after 5 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. As the courtroom filled for the final time, you could have heard a pin drop. David stood, his hands clasped tightly in front of him as he prepared to hear his fate. Lisa sat in the gallery, her hands trembling in her lap. The jury foreman stood holding a small piece of paper that would determine the course of David Martinez's life. The entire courtroom held its breath, waiting to hear the verdict in one of the most controversial cases in recent memory. In the matter of the people of California versus David Martinez, on the charge of attempted murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of the lesser-included offense of voluntary manslaughter. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom, followed by an eruption of emotion. David's knees buckled slightly, but he remained standing. It wasn't acquittal, but it wasn't murder either. Tears streamed down his face as the reality of the verdict sank in. Outside the courthouse, reactions were mixed. Some saw it as justice. David would serve time for his actions but wouldn't spend the rest of his life in prison. Others, particularly domestic violence advocates, were outraged, seeing it as the justice system once again going easy on a man who had tried to kill his wife. The judge, after calling for order in the courtroom, addressed David directly. Sergeant Martinez, while the jury has found you guilty of voluntary manslaughter rather than attempted murder, this court cannot ignore the severity of your actions. You are a trained soldier who used your weapon against an unarmed woman. However, this court also recognizes the unique circumstances of this case and your mental state at the time. You will be sentenced to 12 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years. You will also be required to complete extensive mental health treatment. David nodded, accepting the sentence with quiet dignity. As he was led out of the courtroom, his eyes found Lisa's one final time. What passed between them in that moment? Forgiveness? Regret? Finality? No one could say. In the months following the verdict, life slowly began to move forward for everyone affected by the Martinez case. David was transferred to a medium security facility in Northern California, where he would begin serving his sentence. The military, after reviewing his case, gave him an other-than-honorable discharge, stripping him of many of his veteran benefits. A blow that in many ways hurt more than the prison sentence. Lisa sold a house in Valley Vista, unable to bear living with the memories. She moved to San Francisco, starting fresh at a new hospital and beginning the long process of healing, both physically and emotionally. She filed for divorce, which David did not contest, and she eventually began attending therapy to work through the trauma of both the affair and the shooting. The case had far-reaching implications beyond just David and Lisa. It sparked national debates about PTSD in veterans, the unique pressures of military marriages, and the legal definition of crimes of passion. Several veterans advocacy groups used David's case to push for better mental health resources for returning soldiers. In California, legislators proposed the Martinez Bill, which would require mandatory psychological evaluations for veterans before they could legally possess firearms at home. A proposal that sparked intense debate about Second Amendment rights versus public safety. Valley Vista gradually reclaimed its identity as a quiet, safe neighborhood. The media trucks departed, the protesters moved on to other causes, and life returned to a semblance of normalcy. But the Martinez case became a part of the community's history, a cautionary tale whispered about when someone moved into that house on Oakwood Drive, which eventually sold to a young couple, unaware of its dark past. For David, prison life was a stark contrast to his military service. The structure was similar, but the purpose was gone. He spent his days in the prison library, reading and eventually helping other inmates prepare for their GED exams. He joined a veterans support group within the prison, where he talked openly about PTSD and the importance of seeking help before reaching a breaking point. Michael Torres, his best friend, visited him monthly, a loyal presence even when others had abandoned him. During one visit, 2 years into his sentence, Michael brought news that gave David mixed feelings. Lisa had gotten remarried to an accountant she'd met in her therapy group. "I'm glad," David said quietly, and he meant it. "She deserves happiness. What I did, she didn't deserve that." "You didn't deserve what she did either," Michael replied. "Life's complicated, man." "Yeah," David agreed. "Yeah, it is." As years passed, David became a model prisoner. He completed his associate's degree through a prison education program and began volunteering as a peer counselor for other veterans in the system. In his therapy sessions, he worked through his anger, his guilt, and his PTSD, finally getting the help he should have sought years earlier. On a crisp autumn morning, 8 years after the shooting, David Martinez walked out of prison on parole. He was 43 years old, grayer, thinner, but somehow more at peace than he had been in years. Michael was there to pick him up, along with David's younger sister, Maria, who had stood by him throughout his incarceration. David settled into a halfway house in Sacramento, far from Los Angeles and the memories it held. He found work at a Veterans Outreach Center, helping recently returned soldiers navigate the civilian world and connect with mental health resources. It was work that gave him purpose, a way to turn his tragedy into something meaningful. He never remarried, never even dated. Some wounds, he had learned, don't fully heal. You just learn to live with the scars. But he found contentment in small things: morning coffee while watching the sunrise, conversations with fellow veterans who understood his journey, the knowledge that his story might prevent someone else from making the same mistakes. Lisa, now Lisa Blackwell. Yes, she had married Richard, the man she had been having the affair with, occasionally thought about David. She had forgiven him in her own way, understanding that hurt people sometimes hurt people. She had moved on with her life, but she carried her own scars, both visible and invisible. The story of David and Lisa Martinez would be remembered for years to come, not just as a sensational headline, but as a complex, tragic reminder of how betrayal and violence can shatter lives. It served as a cautionary tale about communication, mental health, and the importance of getting help before reaching a breaking point. In the end, it was a story about human frailty, about how even good people can make terrible choices in moments of unbearable pain. It reminded people that life is complex, that right and wrong aren't always black and white, and that sometimes there are no winners, only survivors trying to piece their lives back together. As David Martinez sat on a bench outside the Veterans Center one evening, watching the sun set over Sacramento, he thought about the day that had changed everything. He thought about the man he had been, the soldier, the husband, the person who believed the world was simple and just, and he thought about the man he had become, scarred, humbled, but perhaps wiser. He would never stop regretting what he had done. He would carry that weight forever. But he had learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about using it to create a better future, one small choice at a time. And as the last rays of sunlight faded, David Martinez allowed himself something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. Hope that his story, painful as it was, might help someone else. Hope that even broken people could find a way forward. The case of David Martinez, soldier, husband, convicted felon, survivor, would continue to be debated and discussed for years. But for David himself, the story was simpler. It was about a man who fell, who paid the price, and who was trying, one day at a time, to stand back up. This true crime story explores the complex and tragic events surrounding Sergeant David Martinez in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Valley Vista. It delves into the devastating impact of infidelity on military marriages, the lengths a betrayed spouse might go to in a moment of rage, and the far-reaching consequences of violent retribution. The narrative follows David's journey from decorated soldier to convicted felon, his subsequent trial, and the long road to healing for both him and Lisa. It also examines the effects on the community of Valley Vista and the broader implications for veteran mental health and domestic violence laws. Ultimately, this story serves as a poignant reminder of how betrayal can push even disciplined individuals beyond their limits, the importance of mental health support for veterans, and the enduring complexity of human nature when faced with unbearable circumstances. Through the Martinez ordeal, we see a tale of tragedy, consequences, and eventual redemption, reminding us of the human capacity to survive even the darkest of times, and the importance of seeking help